He's one of the most notorious killers in Rhode Island history, and Craig Price is making headlines once again tonight.
He's in a secure environment, and he does all this. What's he going to do when he can walk around?
He was a security risk here, and it's clear his violent behavior continued behind bars.
Clean crime, but when he heard about Craig Price, he heard about his story. The story just struck his heart.
Notorious serial killers once again is fighting for his freedom, but prosecutors are fighting back.
Facts and procedural history. In 1989, a 15-year-old boy was accused of slaying Joan M. Heaton and Rebecca Spencer. He was ordered to be committed to the Rhode Island Training School until his 21st birthday, the maximum penalty the court could impose. The court aimed to provide intensive treatment for psychiatric and personality disorders that contributed to his brutal conduct and release him into the community when his commitment ended. Two mental health experts, Shervert Frazier and Wesley Prophet, were appointed to formulate a diagnostic and treatment plan for the defendant. The defendant's withdrawal from the diagnostic process was due to fear of a civil commitment under the mental health law. The court prescribed the course of treatment on several occasions, ordering the defendant to cooperate in the psychiatric evaluation and ensuring it was in his best interests. A guardian ad litem was appointed to advise the defendant about the advantages of psychiatric treatment and sought the intercession of the defendant's parents. The court admonished the defendant that he had no Fifth Amendment right to refuse psychiatric consultation and ordered him to participate in the evaluation and treatment program. Dr. Prophet expressed the importance of the defendant's healing process and warned that if he did not receive treatment and was released into the community, there would be a danger of repeating crimes similar to those he admitted his guilt to.
Craig Price, we obtained records from Rhode Island and Florida where he is currently being held because he's a security risk here.
He's in a secure environment, and he does all this. What's he going to do when he can walk around?
Our findings launched a review of Price's records by prison officials, and we're learning they're now taking action.
He was a security risk here, and it's clear his violent behavior continued behind bars.
He's one of the most notorious killers in Rhode Island history, and Craig Price is making headlines once again tonight.
The court stated that if the defendant did not receive treatment, he would be more likely to be subject to civil commitment at the end of the 5 years. Craig Price, a serial slayer, refused to participate in court-ordered evaluation and treatment programs due to concerns about potential civil commitment. The guardian ad litem reported that after 2 meetings, the defendant was unable to persuade him to participate. The justice ordered him to cooperate, but suggested that his mental condition would deteriorate without outside help or expert therapists. On May 15, 1990, the DJCS reported that the defendant did not want to answer questions and had no interest in treatment. On October 23, 1990, the family court justice informed the DJCS that the defendant would not participate in the evaluation process due to his concern about possible civil commitment.
It's hard to imagine, but Price could be set free November of next year.
When he confessed to murdering 4 neighbors, 22 years later, he's asking to return to Rhode Island to argue his latest appeal.
And Craig Price will always be part of Rhode Island.
The picture of evil for Rhode Island? Notorious serial killers once again is fighting for his freedom, but prosecutors are fighting back.
Dr. Prophet's report indicated that Craig Price is a serial slayer with psychotic rage and a major mental illness that requires treatment. Dr. Prophet suggested that Craig should continue to engage in meaningful treatment and make available the opportunity to meet with a therapist to discuss these matters. He believed that Craig Price's refusal to participate was a manifestation of the pathology underlying his behavior, and that he was in dire need of the best and most intensive treatment available. The defendant in a homicide case continued to refuse to participate in the ordered evaluation and therapeutic process. Despite multiple hearings, the defendant continued to refuse to participate in the evaluation and therapeutic process. The state urged the chief judge of the family court to hold the defendant in contempt, but the chief judge held him in civil contempt and ordered him to be held at adult correctional institutions until he could purge himself of contempt by cooperating with the evaluation process. The defendant moved to be purged of contempt on July 1, 1994, but met with forensic psychiatrist Richard Barnum, MD, who reported that the defendant had lied to him about the events of the homicide. The chief judge denied the motion to purge on June 8, 1995. The state then moved to hold the defendant in criminal contempt, and a jury was impaneled. After a 4-day trial, the jury found the defendant guilty of criminal contempt. The trial judge imposed a sentence of 25 years imprisonment, with 10 years served and the 15-year balance suspended with a probationary period. The defendant has raised 8 issues and numerous sub-issues in support of his appeal. Decision on contempt charges. The defendant argued that he should not have been adjudged in contempt due to his refusal to participate in psychiatric and psychological evaluations based on his Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination. He claimed that his refusal to participate in the diagnostic and treatment process was based on fear that the psychological evaluation might result in him being civilly committed under the mental health law. The family court had exhausted its penal powers when it sentenced the defendant to incarceration at the training school until his 21st birthday, which was the maximum punishment that could be imposed on him as a juvenile. The Supreme Court of the U.S. held that the privilege against self-incrimination did not apply to psychiatric interviews that might lead to civil commitment. The defendant's only concern was regarding a possible civil commitment under the mental health law. Such a mental health certification to a state hospital or psychiatric inpatient facility would be far less punitive in design than the Illinois physically dangerous commitment considered by the Supreme Court in Allen. The defendant also argued that pursuant to State v. Paquette, it was essential that he be instructed about immunity. However, the chief judge of the family court held the defendant in civil contempt for having defied numerous court orders over approximately 5 years without a colorable claim of a privilege against self-incrimination.
We are going to send an inmate to another state because that inmate is problematic.
Earn more good time or lose it depending on his behavior. Now, the Attorney General's office is also trying to increase his sentence.
Clean crime. But when he heard about Craig Price, he heard about his story. The story just struck his heart.
And bad behavior keeps adding more time. Now he's in trouble again.
Price recently spit on a prison guard, and officers claim he made death threats.
Therefore, the defendant's reliance upon the privilege in refusing steadfastly to obey the numerous orders of the family court was misplaced. The trial judge denied the defendant's motion for judgment of acquittal on several grounds, including the Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination. The court found that the defendant was not justified in defying the orders of the family court on these grounds. The defendant also argued that the family court never clearly ordered the defendant to participate and cooperate in the psychiatric evaluation and treatment process. The trial judge rejected this argument, stating that the order of Family Court Justice Suttle was direct, clear, and emphatic, and that the chief judge of the family court had given the defendant the opportunity to purge himself of contempt by complying. The defendant argued that he could not have been held in contempt as a matter of law, since he had been explicitly relying on the advice of counsel throughout his period of disobedience to the orders of the family court. Many courts have rejected the defense of advice of counsel to a charge of criminal contempt, as seen in United States v. Remini and United States v. Armstrong. The Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit also rejected a proposed defense that the conduct of the defendants was not willful because of the good faith reliance upon the advice of counsel not to testify. The trial judge was correct in refusing to grant a motion for judgment of acquittal based upon the argument that defendant had relied upon the advice of counsel. The defendant's other arguments in support of his claim that the trial judge erred in denying his motion for judgment of acquittal were found unpersuasive. Chilling audio tape. Craig Price, currently imprisoned in Florida, has a chilling confession to the slaying of a family of 3 in 1989. The 45-year-old is facing charges that he attempted to slay a fellow prisoner with a homemade knife. The Rhode Island Attorney General's office has requested Price to be held as a probation violator for a series of violent clashes he has had while behind bars. The recording of Price's confession was mailed anonymously to Target 12 and was authenticated by law enforcement sources familiar with the events. The tape was recorded on September 17, 1989, 16 days after the brutal slaying of Joan Heaton and her 2 daughters. Retired Warwick detective Ken Anderson emphasized that Price was not just a poor little kid who went astray, but he slayed 4 people, 2 of whom were children. The tape also revealed Price's nonchalantness in discussing his slaying spree, stating that he was nowhere near remorseful and that he slayed the people like it was nothing. A 15-year-old man named Michael Price was involved in a brutal slaying that left him as the prime suspect.
Bringing these tapes to light for the first time as Price may be set free in just 1 year. And now court records are shedding light on what Price's motivation may have been.
The explosive scene lasted just 40 seconds, but what happened in that short time will keep Craig Price behind bars.
That's one of the questions I've continued to ask is why. Because him and I never had a problem.
Eligible for release, but even then, prosecutors here in Rhode Island want to hold him as a probation violator.
He was convicted of knifing a correctional officer during a brawl with another inmate in Florida in 2004. Price was initially sentenced as a juvenile, but a patchwork of crimes he committed behind bars, including the Heaton slayings, kept him locked up for 3 decades. He was shipped to Florida in 2004 due to his notoriety and was convicted of knifing a correctional officer during a brawl with another inmate. His sentence was extended 2 years ago after Target 12 discovered that the RI Department of Corrections failed to dock Price some of the time off for good behavior he had earned. Assistant Attorney General J. Patrick Youngs had filed a detainer with the Rhode Island courts, asking the Florida Department of Corrections to hold Price when his sentence expires so he can be brought back to Rhode Island as a potential probation violator. Price's actions led to the discovery of a bag containing evidence of the horrors at the Heaton house, which was later found in the shed. That's all for this video, folks. See you next time.